So you are expecting to be a worm parent. This short video will tell you everything you need to know to set up your wormie's new home and how to take care of them. Your worm studio arrives flat packed, and it's really easy to assemble it with just a screwdriver. Instructions to put your box together are included with the package. If you purchased worms in a container that can be sealed, make sure you leave a crack open so that they can breathe. Once assembled, you can find a good spot for your worm bin that is easily accessible, away from direct sunlight, and in a temperature range of 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. But be mindful to keep it away from any heat source. Wormies always need to be in a moist habitat because they breathe through the moisture on their skin. The next step is to prepare the bedding. When you order from the Box of Life, all our packaging is paper-based, including a bunch of shredded cardboard that can be used as bedding, but it helps to have some extra prepared just in case. Materials that work well include newspaper, craft paper from food delivery, cardboard, and egg carton containers. It's much easier to rip cardboard once it's wet. Bedding should be damp, but not dripping like a wrung-out sponge. Once your bedding is ready, add a few sheets of paper on the base tray to absorb any excess liquids that could be released from the bottom of the bin. As you put the damp bedding into the first layer, make sure it does not clump together. It should fill at least 3/4 of the layer. Your first level is now ready for the worms to move in. Gently place your worms on top, and they will find their way to the most comfortable spot. Next, tuck them in under a worm blanket. This can be a piece of cardboard, a burlap sack, an old towel, or bubble wrap. This just helps keep the top from drying out. Did you know that the worms don't have teeth? To help them eat their food faster, you can chop up the scraps into small pieces or even blend it. It's also important to freeze your food first because that prevents flies and makes the food mushy. Your objective as a new parent is to help the worms multiply quickly by feeding them food they love. That includes spent coffee grinds, tea leaves, veggie peels, and non-citrus fruit peels. For the next month, add 2 cups of food per week. Here's a helpful tip. Mentally divide the worm studio in quadrants and feed each quadrant a week. By week 5, you'll be back to feeding the first quadrant, and now you can see if there's any food left. This is a great way to understand whether you are underfeeding or overfeeding, and to make sure every area in the bin gets turned into castings. You'll start to notice other critters in your worm bin too, like white and brown mites, potworms, and springtails. Don't worry, these are all part of a healthy worm bin ecosystem, and they all play a role in converting your food waste into healthy soil. You should check in on your worm studio every couple of days just to make sure the conditions in the bin are good and that the worms are happy. The bin should never smell bad. When you open it, it should smell like soil after it rains. The worm studio is a tiny piece of nature after all. The bedding can dry out, especially at the corners due to cedar's porous nature, so just get a spray bottle and add some extra moisture to the bedding. We don't recommend watering your worm bin, as this will likely lead to a leaky mess on your floor. After a couple of months, you will start to see the food scraps and bedding transform into a brown, soil-like substance. These are called worm castings. This is the result of your composting efforts, thanks to the wormies. The castings contain a mix of carbon-rich paper and nitrogen-rich plant material. This stuff is amazing for the plants in your home and garden. When 2/3 of your first layer is full, and most of it looks like castings, you know it's time to add the next layer. First, fill up the bottom layer with damp bedding, and then add the second layer on top. Make sure that the contents of the first layer touch the mesh of the second, so that the worms can travel upwards to find new food. You will prepare bedding just like you did for the first layer, and then start feeding your food scraps to the second layer. At this point, you should not add any more food to the first layer so that your worms migrate up into the second layer. Once the second layer is full, add the third. After the third layer is almost full, you can check on the first layer, and most or all of the worms should have moved up to find new food, leaving behind castings. To harvest, take out your bottom layer from the stack, empty the castings into a bag or container, and simply place the layer back on top of your stack. Now the second layer has become the bottom layer and will continue to mature while the worms travel up to the newest layer. Your harvested worm castings can be used to fertilize plants or gardens, or make worm casting tea, which acts as a liquid fertilizer. You'll find more information about that in your parenting guide. We've covered the basics of how to set up your worm home and how to take care of them. As a worm parent, you are invited to join our online community on Discord, where you can ask questions, share photos of your bins, and get advice as you embark on your vermicomposting journey. Happy composting!